When Vladimir Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine, he tried to justify it with the ludicrous claim that it was a push to denazify the country.
Мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины.
The irony is that for decades, Putin's own regime has formed strategic alliances with neo-Nazi and ultra-nationalist groups to help achieve Russia's political goals both at home and overseas.
96 non-Russians were killed last year and more than 400 wounded in attacks by members of various nationalist organizations.
This is how the Kremlin has cultivated and weaponized groups of violent ultra-nationalists with deadly consequences. In the early years of the 21st century, a wave of pro-democracy protest movements, known as color revolutions, swept through the countries of the former Soviet Union.
Hundreds of thousands of pro-democracy Ukrainians in the streets today protested against the results of the presidential election.
This rang major alarm bells in the Kremlin, raising fears that a similar movement could take root in Russia.
That was this fear that Ukrainians would set a very bad example for the Russians living in Russia, that they can modernize, that they can democratize, and then it would be very difficult for the Putin regime to repress in Russia.
The Kremlin responded by stepping up a strategy known as managed nationalism, where the government formed behind-the-scenes relationships with various Russian far-right groups, co-opting them as a counterweight to liberal pro-democracy movements.
Managed nationalism was a project of the Putin regime, of the Russian presidential administration, to harness the energies and the angers and the grievances and the resentments of the far right to assist the creation of an authoritarian regime in Russia.
The strategy, aimed at controlling dissent and consolidating power, involved discreet collaboration with the far-right groups that had sprung up after the collapse of the Soviet Union, each with their own extremist vision of Russian nationalism.
It's not something that you will find on any Kremlin website. You won't find Putin explaining that we have this policy called managed nationalism. The Putin regime is so secretive, its functioning is opaque. A lot of policy happens not because there's any announcements about a policy, it happens because there is a go-ahead from someone on high.
Some of these groups were part of the violent, neo-Nazi hooligan subculture that had been behind a wave of racist attacks in post-Soviet Russia.
Nationalist groups often post video reports of their crimes on the internet, using anonymous access from internet cafes. This video, for example, shows the apparent murders of 2 migrant workers from Central Asia.
This is an attack in one of the city's underground walkways. The victims are outnumbered and don't stand a chance. The beating has been filmed by the skinheads to train and recruit new members.
These far-right thugs were now used to attack anti-Putin youth groups, with their newfound political connections emboldening them and giving them a sense of impunity.
There is more political unrest tonight throughout Russia. The largest crowds in 2 decades have come out to protest what they're calling corruption by the government, including ballot stuffing.
Police detained at least 250 people in the capital.
A renewed pro-democracy movement led by opposition activist Alexei Navalny pushed the Kremlin to take managed nationalism even further by cozying up to the hardcore neo-Nazi group Ruski Obraz, whose name means Russian image.
That is arguably the most extreme example of managed nationalism, in the sense that this was a group which was sophisticated, which was building a national network, which had very serious connections with neo-Nazi killers.
Ruski Obraz attacked other nationalists who defected to Navalny's anti-Putin coalition and were given government grants to write reports on liberal activist groups. The group gained valuable political connections and a public platform. This official acceptance of Ruski Obraz was made crystal clear in 2009, when the group was given permission to stage a concert in central Moscow, featuring an infamous Russian neo-Nazi band.
The most notorious Russian neo-Nazi band, which has songs about the heroic Slavs who fought for the Aryan race in the SS. Kolovrat was allowed to perform in Bolotnaya Square within earshot of the Kremlin. At least one of them commented on social media at the time that this shows that a change is taking place within the regime, that they understand that we matter.
But the dangers of the game the Kremlin was playing in buddying up to violent neo-Nazis could no longer be ignored after a string of high-profile murders committed by the group. These would ultimately lead to the group's demise, with court documents in the subsequent trials revealing the extent of its coordination with the Kremlin. The Putin regime's support and weaponization of far-right groups isn't just confined to Russia itself. Since war broke out in Ukraine in 2014, far-right paramilitary groups, including many foreign fighters, have fought as proxy units on the Russian side of the conflict.
Genius Gariev runs the courses and is also head of the Imperial Legion, the RIM's military wing, which has fought alongside Ukrainian separatists.
You've probably heard of the far-right groups that have fought on the Ukrainian side of the conflict, like the controversial Azov Battalion, who the Kremlin likes to point to prop up its bogus fighting Nazis narrative. But what's gotten much less attention has been the role played by far-right militias on the Russian side. One in particular, the militant white supremacist group Russian Imperial Movement, or RIM, has trained up hundreds of recruits and sent them to fight in eastern Ukraine as part of its military wing, the Imperial Legion.
The Imperial Legion's training program is known as Partisan. They basically prepared Russian fighters to destabilize the Kiev government. The Kremlin pragmatically works with these groups and in this way will benefit from these groups' recruitment strategies and sending fresh members to combat zones that will benefit Russia's foreign policy objectives.
While the Kremlin sometimes bans RIM symbols or propaganda, it's generally allowed them the freedom to operate. And that's helped advance Russia's agenda abroad in places like Syria and Libya, where RIM fighters have shown up on the battlefield.
While they say the defense courses are not ideological, Partisan's leadership believes Russia is already embroiled in a proxy war with the US in eastern Ukraine.
The group's also been a major concern for providing military training to neo-Nazis from across Europe.
So in 2016, 2 Swedish members of the white supremacist group Nordic Resistance Movement traveled to St. Petersburg and they participated